Welcome to Quilter's Architect. My name is Mark. This is the fifth video in a multi-part series where I'm doing a sew-along for the pattern Astro Journey, which has a panel in the center and surrounded by various star blocks. In the previous videos, I went into the inspiration and some of the instructions and the cutting and the fabric requirements, as well as constructing the different star blocks. In this video, I'm going to actually start to assemble the quilt. Looking at two of the star blocks that we've made, we have 16 of these, the eccentric star and the hunter's star. And if you look at the pattern, there are actually groupings of 4 of these stars. And since those correspond to the same size as the double sawtooth star with the pinwheel in the center, here on page 7 we see that one of the first things we'll do to assemble the quilt overall is to make 4 patches of the eccentric stars and the hunter's stars. Looking at figure A6 on page 7, we see that we have the arrangement of how the 2 different types of stars form a 4 patch. And so what I'm going to do, we have to make 8 of these 4 patches of stars. And so my plan is to start working on that today. We'll start to see this quilt come together, right? Here I have how our 4 stars are going to go together. So time to make some 4 patches out of these stars. So I joined the 2 upper and lower star blocks to form the top and bottom half of my 4 patch. And now once I get these cut apart, I'm going to press the seams, and then we'll sew the top and bottom half together to get our complete 4 patch. So I've joined the top 2 star blocks in the 4 patch and the bottom 2, and now I'm going back and joining the top and bottom halves to form the entire 4 patch. Okay, so I've sewn the 4 patches, the top and bottom halves together. Next thing is just to press out the seams. So the next step is to prepare a panel, and our panel has our coping strips, and those coping strips are making the panel dimension match the blocks that correspond to the panel. So we add those coping strips to the panel so that the dimensions of the panel plus the coping strips will correspond to the blocks that are in alignment with our panel. On page 8, we can see that one of the first steps is to make sure that our panel is 23 by 42. If not, we need to trim it to that size for the rest of the pattern instructions to work along with the coping strips. But you might want to have a second person help you and hold this panel up and make sure that the panel doesn't look cattywampus or it's on an angle like it's twisted, because sometimes these panels can get twisted. Before you do any trimming, to make sure that the panel is 23 by 42, you want to make sure that it isn't distorted or shifted, twisted, right? And that's something that you might have to work with it on a large table with an iron to get it, straightened out a little bit. So when it comes to cutting your panel, you're probably going to have to adapt your approach to the workspace you have. How big is your cutting area? And then how big of a ruler do you have? Those type of factors. And you might have to fold the panel so that the panel matches, the ruler size, so that you can cut one time, and maybe you're cutting 2 layers of fabric in the panel. Now, once you get your panel 23 by 42, as it mentions here on page 8, it talks about the next step involved, and that is to join 3 of the eye pieces and cut 2 42 by 5 1/4 coping strips. So I have my coping strips here. In my case, these are blue. And if you look on page 2 at the cutting instructions, it says that piece I there are 3 of the width of fabric by 5 1/4. What we need to do is, since we have our width of fabric strips here for our coping strips on the side, we're going to sew all 3 of them together, and then we can cut out the length that we need for each side, up and down the sides of the panel. So that's the first step, is just to sew all 3 of these together. Okay, so my ends are square. I can sew these together, and then I can cut out the coping strips that I need for the sides. My side coping strips need to be 42 by 5 1/4. So half of that would be 21. Just double checking, I have it at 21. And I'm also square. So the next step on page 8, step 4, join the left and right coping strips, pieces I to the panels illustrated in figure A9. Okay, going to do the same thing on the opposite side, pinning at the top and bottom, and then in the middle. Before we can join the top and bottom ones, we need to press open our seams. So we'll work on that, and then we'll be able to add our top and bottom coping strips. Okay, so I have the left and right coping strips added to the panel, and now I'm going to add the top and bottom ones. So back on page 8, instruction number 5 tells us to join the top and bottom coping strips to the panel, as illustrated in figure A9. If we look on page 2 at our cutting instructions, you'll see under the fabric pieces, item J, there are 2 of the 32.5 by 3 3/4 inch coping strips. So I'm going to do a similar thing to what I did for the side coping strips and pin them at the top and bottom, and then halfway, and then also in between, halfway and the ends. So I've joined the top and bottom coping strips to the panel, And now I'm just going to press out my seams. Here is the panel with both coping strips joined to it. So now I'm going to move on to assembling the first row, and we find this on page 9. And it is important on the assembly to note the orientation of the star blocks that are basically 4 patches of the eccentric star and the hunter star. Because if you look at the overall pattern, I do have some of them with a different orientation. Some of them are turned a different way. So just pay close attention to that so we get them turned the right way. And we can see here in the first row that the hunter star is in the upper left-hand corner and the eccentric star is in the upper right-hand corner. So I'm going to join the blocks for the first row. So in other words, here's the way this 4 patch will be oriented in that first row. And given that the 4 patch of the smaller stars has many more seams due to all the HSTs, I'm going to put it on top so that I can pay close attention to how all these seams go under the pressure foot. Now that I have the first row joined together, I'm just going to press out these seams and we'll move on to the next step. So here's the first row, a little wide, so kind of hard to get it all on camera, on video. And so we'll move on to the next section. On page 10, we have instructions that have to do with assembling the second row of our quilt. And before we can assemble the entire row, we have to assemble the blocks that are on each side of the panel. Once those are assembled, we'll be able to join the one side to the panel and then to the other side to form the second row of our quilt. One thing to pay attention to is the orientation of the 4-patch blocks with stars, because they aren't all in the same orientation. So we have to look at that before we sew them together to make sure we line them up correctly. I'm going to start with the left-hand side. And on the left-hand side, the top 4-patch has the eccentric star to the top left, but on the bottom, underneath the double sawtooth star, the next 4-patch has the hunter star to the top left. Now for the right hand side, the hunter star is in the top left. It's above the double sawtooth star with the pinwheel block. And then for the bottom 4-patch, the hunter star is in the top left, hunter star is in the top right on the top. Just making sure we don't turn these around. Okay, just going to press out the seams here on these groupings of 3 blocks on the left and right sides of the panel. The next step will be about joining these to the panel itself. So on each side of the panel, there are this set of blocks. So now that we have these done, we'll move on to the next step to join these to the panel. So I decided that if I'm going to pin these panels together to make the second row, you know, they're such long panels, I think I'll pin them because it's very bulky and it's going to tend to want to pull or stretch as you work it through the table. So I laid them on the floor. I just felt like it's probably going to be easier just lay them on the floor. And of course I'll turn them face to face on edge and then pin them so I can sew each side panel of star blocks to the center panel with its coping strips. Here on page 11 we have figure A12. We're joining the right and left panels. We composed of various star blocks with the center panel with the coping strips. So I pinned one side, I'm going to sew that, and then I'll pin the other side and join that. So I put this on the floor again and pin the other side, and now I'm going to join that side. Okay, so now that I've joined the 2 side panels with the center panel to form the second row, I'm just going to press out these seams. Here is the center panel with the 2 panels on the side attached or joined. So making good progress. That's row 2. I just need to put row 3 together. Next in our instructions we have page 12 with figure A13. And this is the 3rd row, and we'll be joining 2 of the double sawtooth star blocks on the outside with 2 of the 4-patch of the other stars. Again, we have to pay close attention to the arrangement, the orientation of the 4-patch stars, because we could turn them the wrong direction. And notice that if you look at the diagram, the eccentric star is to the top left and the hunter star is to the top right. So as long as we turn both of those that way, we should be good. Okay, I've joined the blocks in row 3. I'll press these seams open and then I'll move on to the next step, which is assembling the 3 primary rows in the quilt. Okay, here is the 3rd row. All the blocks joined together. Now we can move on to the next step, which is to join rows 1, 2, and 3. So I found it easier to just lay the quilt on the floor. It's a hardwood floor, so it's nice and flat and smooth. And laid the 1st and 2nd rows together and pinned that since this is so large and bulky. And now I'm going to join rows 1 and 2. Well, I was going all day and I didn't do that, but I grabbed the needle with my finger and it's gonna bleed, so gonna have to get a band-aid. Okay, crisis averted, band-aid included, so won't bleed on the quilt. Try to get this started here. I laid this on the floor again so I could pin the other row to the quilt so I could do the joining, and kind of folded it up. I don't know, there's probably some better way to do this, but I tried to fold it so that long ways it's not going to run into something, and the other way maybe it'll come up out of my lap. I'm sure there's better ways to do this, but it's kind of, you know how this is, it's kind of bulky and a little hard to manage on the table, but get at it. Okay, so we've joined rows 1, 2, and 3 together, and now the task at hand is to press out these seams. Okay, so I didn't hang it up on the wall, which would probably be a much better view. Instead, I laid it on the floor, so it's a little distorted because I can't really hold the camera up high enough to get a camera parallel to the floor and still get the entire quilt. Now we just need to work on the borders next. So it's time to assemble the border. Looking on page 14, it mentions that we're using pieces B and C. Looking at the cutting instructions on page 2, we see that under our gray fabric, we find a width of fabric by 3.5 strips for fabrics B and C. Is I'm going to just join all of those together. I have 8 of those in total, and I'm going to afterwards cut 2 80.5 strips and 2 70.5 strips. We want to lay our quilt out in a spot where we can get a good measurement and verify the exact measurement before we cut those lengths. But that's what the instructions give us as our starting point, and we'll have to check our length. I have those strips here, and I pinned them all already. I'm going to sew them like this with a diagonal line across, and then fold these and press them so that the seams are on a 45-degree and not straight across between the fabric pieces. And of course we need to press open our seams before we can cut our lengths of our border strips. So I laid this on the long arm that Sherry has here in the living room, and I pinned the side border to the quilt. It's pretty long here, over 80 inches. So to help manage this is I join the border to the quilt. So I have my side border pinned to the quilt, and I'm going to go ahead and start joining that with the sewing machine. Okay, so I've sewn the border on each side of the quilt. I just need to press out these seams, and then I'll move on to the top and bottom borders. I finished pressing the seams on the side borders, and now I'm going to cut the top and bottom border and join those to the quilt. It's looking good. Okay, so just like the sides, I pinned the top border, and time to sew that together. Okay, here's the bottom border. Have it pinned, ready to join to the quilt. Okay, so time to sew the bottom border onto the quilt. And this is the last border. So once I get this done, it'll be time to get in Miss Sherry's queue for long arming. Okay, so I've joined the top and bottom borders, and now I'm going to press out the seam. Well, I'm really happy with the way this Astro Journey quilt pattern turned out. I love the panel with all the different stars along with these fabric combinations. I hope that you also attempted to make this quilt. If you did, please send your finish to Sherry on Lessons Learned for her Finish It Friday video. And if you enjoy receiving free quilt patterns and doing sew-alongs like this, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Please leave any comments and give a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. And in the meantime, I am wishing you happy sewing and beautiful finishes.